Have you ever been so successful that your own family couldn't recognize you? So wealthy that the people who raised you would block you from entering your own empire? Tonight, I'm going to tell you about Isabella Martinez, a woman who built a luxury hotel dynasty from nothing, only to watch her own blood turn against her in the most humiliating way possible. But what happened next? What happened when they discovered the truth? Well, let's just say that sometimes the sweetest revenge is simply letting people discover who they've been betraying all along. This is a story about family blindness, about assumptions that cost everything, and about a moment of revelation so shocking that it changed 3 lives forever. But before we dive into that night, before we witness the moment when Isabella's security chief approached those glass doors, we need to go back. We need to understand how a girl who once shared cereal with her sister for breakfast could end up owning a $50 million hotel empire while her own mother whispered that she was an embarrassment to the family name. Isabella Martinez wasn't born into luxury. She wasn't handed keys to penthouses or trust funds that guaranteed her success. No, Isabella's story begins in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in East Los Angeles, where the rent was always 3 days late and dinner was often just rice and beans stretched to feed 4 people. Her mother, Carmen Martinez, worked double shifts at a textile factory, her hands permanently stained from industrial dyes. Her father had left when Isabella was 7, leaving behind nothing but empty beer bottles and a stack of unpaid bills. Carmen raised 2 daughters on her own, Isabella, the older one, quiet and studious, and Sophia, 2 years younger, beautiful and charming in the way that made adults smile and slip her extra candy at the corner store. From the very beginning, it was clear that Carmen had a favorite. Sophia was the one who got new clothes for school pictures. Sophia was the one whose report cards were hung on the refrigerator, even when Isabella's grades were higher. Sophia was the golden child, the one who would bring pride to the Martinez name. Isabella? Isabella was just expected to be responsible, to help with bills, to fade into the background so Sophia could shine. By 16, Isabella was working weekends at a local diner, sliding her paychecks across the kitchen table to help with rent. She watched her mother beam with pride when Sophia was elected homecoming princess, watched her fuss over Sophia's prom dress while Isabella's own junior prom came and went without a word. This wasn't malicious neglect, you understand. Carmen loved both her daughters. But love isn't always equal, and attention isn't always fair. Isabella learned early that if she wanted something, she had to get it herself. While Sophia dated the captain of the football team, Isabella studied business textbooks she'd borrowed from the library. While Sophia planned weekend parties, Isabella planned her escape from poverty. She knew she was different from her family. She could see patterns they couldn't see, opportunities they couldn't imagine. But she also knew that pointing this out would only make her seem arrogant, ungrateful. So Isabella kept her dreams quiet. She applied to college with money she'd saved from the diner, scholarship applications she'd filled out in secret. When she got accepted to UCLA with a partial scholarship, Carmen's reaction wasn't pride. It was worry. College is expensive, Mija, Carmen said, stirring beans on the stove without looking at Isabella. And who knows if you'll even finish? Sophia, she's practical. She's going to community college, staying close to home. That's smart. Isabella felt something crack inside her chest that night. Not break, exactly, but crack. Like ice on a lake that's still safe to walk on, but won't be for much longer. She realized then that her mother didn't see her potential. Carmen saw Isabella as the steady one, the reliable one, the one who would always be there to help with bills and babysit Sophia's eventual children and never quite achieve anything that would outshine the golden daughter. But Isabella went to UCLA anyway. She majored in business administration with a focus on hospitality management. She worked 3 part-time jobs to cover what her scholarships didn't, sleeping 4 hours a night and surviving on vending machine coffee and determination. Her mother called once a month, always with the same question: when are you coming home to get a real job? Sophia, meanwhile, dropped out of community college after 1 semester to marry her high school boyfriend, a mechanic named Diego who was nice enough but had never met a dream he couldn't ignore. Carmen was thrilled. She planned the wedding with a joy she'd never shown for Isabella's accomplishments. Fussing over centerpieces and dress fittings like this was the culmination of everything she'd hoped for her daughters. Isabella came home for the wedding, of course. She wore a dress she'd bought at Goodwill and altered herself, and she smiled in all the family photos. But she noticed things that weekend. She noticed how Diego looked at other women when Sofia wasn't watching. She noticed the way he talked about money like it was something that happened to other people, never something you could create or control. She noticed her mother's relief that at least one daughter was settled, safe, following the expected path. And she noticed how everyone talked about her college education like it was her expensive hobby, something nice but ultimately impractical. Isabella's always been the smart one, they'd say, like intelligence was a consolation prize for not being as pretty as Sofia. After graduation, Isabella took a job as an assistant manager at a mid-tier hotel in downtown Los Angeles. The pay wasn't much, but it was a foothold in the industry she'd chosen. She lived in a studio apartment that cost 60% of her income and ate cereal for dinner more nights than she cared to admit. But she was learning. She was watching how the hotel operated, studying what worked and what didn't, building relationships with suppliers and staff and guests. Her family didn't understand what she did for work. When she tried to explain hotel management, Carmen would nod politely and then ask when she was going to find a nice husband and settle down like Sofia. During family dinners, the conversation always centered on Sofia's life, her marriage, her part-time job at a salon, her plans to start a family soon. Isabella's work was mentioned in passing, if at all. Isabella's still playing manager at that hotel, Carmen would tell relatives, like it was temporary, like Isabella was still figuring out her real life. But Isabella wasn't playing. She was learning everything: how to read occupancy reports, how to manage staff schedules, how to handle difficult guests, how to negotiate with vendors. She worked 60-hour weeks without overtime pay because she knew this job was her classroom, and she couldn't afford to waste the education. 3 years into her hotel career, Isabella made a discovery that would change everything. She was reviewing the hotel's financial records late one night, looking for ways to cut costs, when she noticed something strange. The hotel was profitable, very profitable, but the owners were only keeping it marginally operational. They were running it like a low-end motel when the location and bones of the building could support something much more upscale. Isabella spent the next month researching. She studied comparable properties, analyzed market rates, calculated renovation costs. What she found was staggering. With the right investments and management, this hotel could triple its revenue within 2 years. So Isabella did something that terrified her. She requested a meeting with the owners, an elderly couple who had inherited the property from the husband's father and had been content to let it coast for decades. She walked into their office with a 40-page business plan and a proposal that made her voice shake, let her implement her improvements in exchange for a small ownership stake. They laughed. Not cruelly, but the way adults laugh when a child suggests something adorable and impossible. They thanked her for her enthusiasm and suggested she focus on her current responsibilities. Isabella left that meeting with her face burning with embarrassment, but also with a clarity that felt like ice water in her veins. She had been thinking too small. She didn't need to convince these owners to see her vision. She needed to create her own vision, with her own property. Before I reveal what Isabella did next, and how her family's reaction nearly destroyed her, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't believe how this woman went from being laughed out of an office to owning an empire that would make her family beg for forgiveness. Isabella spent the next year living like a monk. She worked her regular job, then worked weekends at a catering company, then drove for a rideshare service late at night. She saved every dollar that didn't go to basic survival. She ate ramen noodles and wore the same 5 outfits in rotation and cancelled her internet to save $30 a month. Her social life disappeared completely, but Isabella had never been more focused in her life. She was saving for a down payment, but not on just any property. Isabella had found something extraordinary, a neglected boutique hotel in West Hollywood that had been on the market for 8 months. The building was gorgeous, built in the 1940s with Art Deco details that made her heart race, but it had been run into the ground by owners who had no vision and no capital to match their location. The asking price was $2.8 million. Isabella had saved $40,000. On paper, this was impossible. But Isabella had learned something about impossible things. They're often just difficult things that require more creativity than most people are willing to invest. So Isabella spent 3 months crafting a proposal that was part business plan, part love letter, part financial magic trick. She approached the sellers with an offer that was lower than asking price but came with a plan so detailed, so passionate, and so clearly researched that it was obvious she wasn't some dreamer with delusions of grandeur. Isabella was a professional who had found her calling. Her offer was this: she would put down her $40,000 immediately, take over the property's existing debt, and pay the balance of her offer through a combination of small business loans, revenue sharing, and a 10-year payment plan that would actually net the sellers more money than a cash offer from someone else, because Isabella's improvements would increase the property value significantly. It took 6 weeks, 4 meetings, and more financial documentation than Isabella had known existed, but the sellers said yes. At 28 years old, Isabella Martinez became the owner of the Sunset Manor Hotel. The day she signed the papers, Isabella called her mother to share the news. She expected shock, maybe concern about the debt she was taking on, but ultimately pride that her daughter had achieved something remarkable. Carmen's response was silence, followed by, "Isabella, honey, are you sure you know what you're doing? This sounds very risky. What if you lose everything?" Isabella tried to explain her business plan, the market research, the projected profits. Carmen listened with the patience of someone waiting for a child to finish an elaborate fantasy before returning to reality. "Mija, I just don't want to see you get hurt. Sophia's been asking if you might want to come work at the salon with her. It's steady work, good tips, and you'd be close to family again." That night, Isabella sat in her empty hotel lobby, surrounded by dust sheets and renovation plans, and realized that her mother truly didn't understand what she had just accomplished. Carmen saw Isabella's success not as achievement, but as risk. Not as growth, but as departure from the family's expectations. But Isabella didn't have time to process this emotional wound fully, because renovating a hotel while keeping it operational is approximately as easy as performing surgery on yourself. She spent the next 18 months working 100-hour weeks, learning skills she'd never needed before: construction management, interior design, vendor negotiation on a scale that made her previous job look like running a lemonade stand. Isabella gutted the hotel's rooms one floor at a time, upgrading everything from plumbing to light fixtures to the thread count of the sheets. She negotiated deals with local artists to provide original artwork for every room. She redesigned the lobby to showcase the building's Art Deco bones while adding modern touches that made guests feel like they were stepping into a movie set. Most importantly, Isabella hired staff who shared her vision. She paid better than her competitors because she knew that exceptional service came from people who felt valued, not just employed. She created a culture at the Sunset Manor where employees genuinely cared about guest experience, because Isabella had shown them that their work mattered. The hotel reopened to rave reviews 18 months after Isabella took ownership. Travel bloggers called it a hidden gem that rivals Beverly Hills luxury at refreshingly honest prices. Business travelers started requesting the Sunset Manor specifically. Wedding parties booked out entire floors months in advance. Within 2 years, the hotel was not only profitable but dramatically successful. Isabella had been conservative in her projections because she'd needed to be, but the reality exceeded even her most optimistic hopes. She was making more money than she'd ever imagined possible, and more importantly, she had created something beautiful that made people happy. But Isabella's family still didn't really understand what she did. When she tried to describe her work during Sunday dinners, their eyes glazed over. When she mentioned revenue figures or occupancy rates, Carmen would nod and then redirect the conversation to Sophia's life, her new pregnancy, her husband's promotion to shop foreman, their plans to buy a house with a backyard. Isabella began to realize that her success was making her mother uncomfortable. Not because Carmen wasn't proud, exactly, but because Isabella's achievements were so far outside Carmen's experience that they felt threatening somehow. Like Isabella was becoming someone Carmen couldn't relate to, couldn't advise, couldn't fully understand. And maybe that was true. Isabella was changing. Success had given her confidence that showed in how she dressed, how she spoke, how she moved through the world. She wore expensive clothes now, not because she was showing off, but because she was representing her business and herself in rooms where appearance mattered. She spoke knowledgeably about real estate markets and investment strategies because those had become part of her daily reality. But to Carmen, these changes looked like Isabella was becoming someone else. Someone who might think she was too good for family dinners and shared apartments and the simple life that had been enough for Carmen. The tension came to a head during Isabella's 30th birthday dinner. Sophia was 6 months pregnant, glowing with the kind of contentment that comes from following the path everyone expects you to follow. Carmen had cooked Isabella's favorite meal and invited extended family to celebrate at Sophia's house, which she and Diego had finally been able to buy with help from Carmen's savings. Isabella arrived straight from a meeting with investors who were interested in partnering with her to open a second location. She was wearing a tailored blazer and carrying a leather portfolio, and she was genuinely excited to share her news with the people she loved most. But the moment she walked through Sophia's front door, Isabella could feel the shift in energy. Her cousins looked her up and down with expressions she couldn't quite read. Her uncle made a joke about fancy Isabella that was probably meant to be affectionate but felt pointed. Carmen fussed over Sophia's comfort, bringing her pillows and glasses of water, while treating Isabella like a guest in her own family. During dinner, Isabella mentioned the investor meeting and her plans for expansion. The table went quiet in a way that felt loaded, uncomfortable. Finally, Sophia spoke up. "That's great, Isabella, but don't you think you should be careful about getting too big for your britches? I mean, one hotel is already a lot to handle." Isabella looked around the table and saw agreement in several faces. These people who had known her since childhood, who had watched her work 3 jobs to get through college, who should have been celebrating her success, were instead warning her against it. "I'm not getting too big for anything," Isabella said carefully. "I'm growing a business that I've worked very hard to build." Carmen reached over and patted Isabella's hand in a way that felt patronizing. "We know you work hard, Mija. We just don't want to see you take on more than you can handle. You're still young, you know. There's time to settle down, find a nice husband, maybe sell that hotel and start a family." Isabella felt that crack in her chest widen. "Mom, I don't want to sell my hotel. This is my career, my life's work. I'm good at this." "Of course you're good at it," Carmen said in a tone that suggested the opposite. "But is it making you happy? Really happy? Look at Sophia. She has Diego, she has the baby coming, she has a real life. What do you have? A job that keeps you busy all the time?" Isabella looked at Sophia, who was avoiding eye contact now, picking at her food like the conversation had become too awkward to engage with directly. Isabella realized that her sister, who had once looked up to her, now saw her success as somehow threatening or wrong. That night, Isabella drove home to her penthouse apartment, which she had finally been able to afford after years of reinvesting every dollar back into the hotel. She sat on her terrace, looking out at the city lights, and tried to understand how her greatest achievements had somehow become sources of tension with the people she loved most. She realized that her family couldn't see her success for what it was because they couldn't imagine it for themselves. To them, Isabella's lifestyle looked like risk disguised as accomplishment. Her independence looked like loneliness. Her ambition looked like dissatisfaction with the life that had been good enough for them. Isabella made a decision that night that she would later come to regret. She decided to pull back from her family, not out of anger, but out of a desire to protect both them and herself from the discomfort her success seemed to create. She would keep achieving, keep growing, keep building her empire, but she would stop trying to share it with people who couldn't understand it. Over the next 3 years, Isabella's hotel empire exploded. She opened a second location in Beverly Hills, then a third in Manhattan Beach. She developed a reputation as the boutique hotel queen of Los Angeles, someone who could take neglected properties and transform them into destination experiences that commanded premium rates while maintaining intimate, personal service. Isabella was featured on the cover of Hospitality Business magazine. She was invited to speak at industry conferences. She was making millions of dollars annually and had built a company that employed over 200 people across her 3 properties. But her relationship with her family grew increasingly distant. Isabella still attended major events, birthday parties, and holidays, but the conversations were surface level. Carmen would ask how her hotel job was going, like Isabella was still an employee rather than an owner. Sophia would make comments about Isabella's expensive clothes or cars that felt more critical than admiring. Isabella began to feel like a stranger at her own family gatherings. Not because she had changed dramatically as a person, but because her life had expanded so far beyond her family's experience that they couldn't relate to her daily reality anymore. When Isabella talked about challenges like zoning permits or staff management or marketing strategies, she could see her family's attention drift away. When Isabella talked about successes, like being featured in prestigious travel magazines or hosting celebrity events, she could see something that looked almost like resentment in their faces. Not because they wanted her to fail, but because her achievements highlighted the gap between their worlds. The final breaking point came during Isabella's 33rd birthday. She had just completed the purchase of her fourth property, a stunning historic hotel in downtown Los Angeles that she planned to restore to its 1920s grandeur. This was her biggest project yet, a $15 million investment that would cement her reputation as one of the city's premier boutique hotel developers. Isabella was so excited about the project that she decided to invite her family to see the property before renovations began. She thought maybe if they could see what she was building, literally see the vision she had for transforming this neglected space into something beautiful, they might finally understand her work. Carmen and Sophia agreed to visit, though Isabella could tell they were doing it more out of obligation than genuine interest. Isabella met them at the hotel on a Saturday morning, wearing work clothes because she planned to walk them through construction areas. The building was magnificent even in its neglected state. Soaring ceilings, original marble floors, intricate moldings that spoke to the craftsmanship of a different era. Isabella walked her mother and sister through the lobby, explaining her plans for restoration, pointing out architectural details that most people would miss. Carmen and Sophia followed politely, making appropriate noises of interest, but Isabella could tell they weren't really seeing what she was seeing. To them, this was just an old, dirty building that would require enormous amounts of money to make functional. After the tour, they went to lunch at a nearby restaurant. Isabella was still energized from showing off her new project, still hoping that maybe this time her family would understand the scope of what she was creating. Instead, Sophia looked across the table with an expression that was part concern, part frustration. "Isabella, can I ask you something? Are you happy? I mean, really happy? Because from the outside, it looks like you're just accumulating more and more work, more and more responsibility. When was the last time you took a vacation? When was the last time you went on a date?" Isabella felt her excitement deflate like a punctured balloon. "I am happy, Sophia. This is what I love doing. These hotels, they're my life's work, my legacy." Carmen reached over and squeezed Isabella's hand. "Mija, we're not trying to criticize. We just worry about you. You're 33 years old, and you spend all your time working. Sophia has Diego, she has little Carmen now, she has a family. What do you have when you go home at night?" Isabella looked at her mother and sister, these two women who had shaped her childhood and adolescence, and realized they genuinely believed that her success was a consolation prize for not having the life they thought she should want. "I have businesses that I built from nothing," Isabella said quietly. "I have employees who depend on me, guests who trust me to provide them with exceptional experiences, properties that I've brought back to life. I have work that matters to me." Sophia shook her head. "But work isn't everything, Isabella. Don't you want someone to share your life with? Don't you want children? A real family?" Isabella felt anger rise in her throat, the kind of anger that comes from being fundamentally misunderstood by people who are supposed to know you better than anyone else. "This is my real life," Isabella said, keeping her voice level. "These hotels, this work, this is what fulfills me. I'm not working this hard because I can't find a husband. I'm not building an empire because I'm afraid of intimacy. I'm doing this because I'm good at it, because I love it, because it's who I am." Carmen sighed in a way that suggested Isabella was being deliberately difficult. "We understand that you're successful, Mija. We're proud of you. But success isn't everything. At some point, you have to think about what really matters." Isabella stared at her mother, feeling a chasm open between them that she knew would never fully close. Carmen thought Isabella's life was incomplete because it didn't match the template Carmen understood: marriage, children, a husband who provided while the wife supported. Isabella's independence wasn't strength in Carmen's eyes, it was evidence that something was missing. That lunch ended with polite hugs and promises to stay in touch more often, but Isabella drove home knowing something fundamental had shifted. She loved her mother and sister, but they couldn't see her for who she actually was. They could only see who they thought she should be, and that person was someone smaller, simpler, more conventional than the woman Isabella had become. Over the next 2 years, Isabella threw herself even deeper into her work. She completed the restoration of her downtown property, which became the crown jewel of her collection. She expanded her company to include event planning and catering services. She began consulting with other hotel owners who wanted to replicate her success. Isabella's net worth crossed $50 million. She owned 4 luxury hotels, employed over 300 people, and had become one of the most recognizable names in Los Angeles hospitality. But her family relationships continued to deteriorate, not through any dramatic confrontation, but through the slow erosion of understanding. Carmen and Sofia saw Isabella's continued success as evidence that she was choosing work over family, ambition over love. They interpreted her expensive clothes and cars as showing off rather than professional necessity. They viewed her busy schedule as selfishness rather than responsibility to her employees and guests. Isabella, meanwhile, felt increasingly isolated from the people who had once been her closest relationships. She had friends in the industry, she had business associates, she had staff who respected and admired her work. But she missed the unconditional acceptance she had once felt from her family, even as she recognized that acceptance had been conditional on her staying small enough for them to understand. The breaking point, the moment that would lead to the confrontation outside Isabella's own hotel, began with Sofia's second pregnancy. She was having complications that required bed rest, and Carmen was spending most of her time helping with childcare and household management. Isabella offered to help in the ways she could, paying for a house cleaner, covering grocery deliveries, sending meals from her hotel kitchens. But these gestures, meant to be supportive, seemed to create more resentment than gratitude. Sofia complained to Carmen that Isabella was throwing money at everything instead of actually being present. Carmen worried that Isabella was trying to buy her way out of family responsibility. They began to talk about Isabella as someone who had forgotten where she came from, someone who thought she was too good for the simple acts of service that real family members provided. These conversations, which Isabella wasn't part of but somehow sensed, created a narrative about her character that bore no resemblance to how she saw herself. Isabella thought she was being helpful in the ways that played to her strengths. Carmen and Sofia saw her financial support as evidence that Isabella had lost touch with what really mattered. The misunderstanding reached a crescendo during Sofia's baby shower, which Carmen organized at a community center near Sofia's house. Isabella arrived with an elaborate gift basket and a check for Sofia's hospital bills, gestures she intended as expressions of love and support. But the other women at the shower, Sofia's friends and Carmen's co-workers, looked at Isabella's designer outfit and expensive gifts with expressions that ranged from impressed to envious to disapproving. Isabella felt like she was on display as the successful sister, a role that seemed to make everyone, including Sofia, uncomfortable. During the gift opening, Sofia thanked Isabella politely for her presence, but with the kind of formality usually reserved for acquaintances rather than family. When Isabella's check was revealed, there was an awkward silence that Carmen filled with nervous laughter and a comment about Isabella being too generous for her own good. Isabella realized she had made a mistake, but she couldn't figure out what it was. She had wanted to help, to show her love through the means available to her. Instead, she had somehow made her sister's celebration about the gap between their lifestyles. After the shower, Carmen pulled Isabella aside for a conversation that would haunt Isabella for months afterward. "Mija, I need to talk to you about something, and I hope you'll listen with an open heart. I know you love Sofia, and I know you want to help, but sometimes your help feels like showing off. The expensive gifts, the big checks, it makes other people feel bad about what they can afford to give." Isabella felt her face flush with embarrassment and hurt. "Mom, I'm not trying to show off. I'm trying to help my sister during a difficult time. I thought you'd be happy that I can afford to take care of my family now." Carmen's expression softened, but her words remained firm. We don't need you to take care of us, Isabella. We need you to be part of the family, not above it. When you give expensive gifts and write big checks, it feels like you're treating us like a charity project instead of like people you love. Isabella stared at her mother, feeling a familiar crack in her chest widen into something that felt like a canyon. So I'm supposed to pretend I'm not successful? I'm supposed to hide what I've achieved so other people feel comfortable? I'm not asking you to hide anything. I'm asking you to remember that money isn't the most important thing. Your presence matters more than your presence. Your time matters more than your checkbook. Isabella left that conversation feeling more confused than angry. She understood what her mother was saying intellectually, but emotionally, it felt like punishment for achieving everything she had worked toward. Isabella's financial success was being reframed as emotional failure, her generosity as arrogance, her pride in her accomplishments as forgetting her roots. Over the following months, Isabella pulled back from family events even further. Not out of spite, but out of genuine confusion about how to navigate relationships where her success seemed to create more problems than solutions. She sent gifts and cards for birthdays and holidays, but she stopped attending gatherings where her presence seemed to make everyone uncomfortable. Carmen interpreted Isabella's absence as confirmation that success had changed her daughter into someone who thought she was too good for family. Sophia began telling friends that her sister had gotten too big for her britches and rarely came around anymore unless she was writing checks. These narratives, repeated often enough, became truth in the family's collective memory. Isabella became the daughter who had forgotten her family, the sister who cared more about money than relationships, the woman who had traded love for luxury. Isabella, isolated in her penthouse and buried in her work, had no idea how completely her character had been rewritten in her family's minds. She thought the distance between them was mutual, a natural result of having grown in different directions. She didn't realize that Carmen and Sophia had begun to actively resent what they saw as Isabella's abandonment of family values. If you're still watching this story unfold, you're different from the rest. You understand that sometimes the people we love most are the ones who understand us least. Hit that subscribe button and like this video, because what happens next will shock you. Isabella's family is about to discover just how wrong they've been about everything. The confrontation that would change everything began on a rainy Thursday evening in March. Isabella had been working late at her flagship hotel, the original Sunset Manor that had launched her empire 7 years earlier. She was reviewing plans for a fifth property when her assistant knocked on her office door. "Ms. Martinez, there's a situation in the lobby you should know about. Your mother and sister are here, and they seem quite upset." Isabella felt her stomach drop. Carmen and Sophia never visited her hotels unannounced. If they were here, something was wrong. Isabella took the elevator down to the lobby, her mind racing through possibilities. Had something happened to Sophia's pregnancy? Was there a family emergency she hadn't been told about? What she found when the elevator doors opened was worse than any emergency she had imagined. Carmen and Sophia were standing near the concierge desk, both crying, both looking at Isabella with expressions that mixed desperation with something that looked almost like accusation. Sophia was obviously pregnant again, further along than Isabella had known. Carmen looked older, more fragile than Isabella remembered, her hair grayer and her shoulders more stooped. "Mom!" "Sophia? What's wrong? What happened?" Carmen stepped forward, wringing her hands in a gesture Isabella remembered from childhood, when bills came in the mail that they couldn't afford to pay. "Isabella, we need your help." Sophia lost her job at the salon, and Diego got hurt at work. His disability payments won't start for 6 weeks, and they're going to lose the house. The mortgage company filed foreclosure papers yesterday. Isabella's mind immediately shifted into problem-solving mode. "Okay, how much do you need? I can write you a check tonight, we can call the mortgage company in the morning and work out a payment plan." But instead of relief, Carmen's face crumpled with something that looked like shame mixed with anger. "We don't want your money, Isabella. We want you to care. We want you to act like family instead of like a bank. Sophia called you 6 times last week, and you never called back. I've been leaving messages for 2 months, and you send flowers and gift cards like we're business associates." Isabella felt the familiar confusion wash over her. "Mom, I've been traveling for business, opening the new property. I thought the flowers and cards showed I was thinking about you. I didn't know Sophia was calling about an emergency. Sophia stepped forward, her pregnancy making her movement awkward, her face streaked with tears. They weren't all emergencies, Isabella. Some of them were just. I wanted to talk to my sister. I wanted to tell you about the baby, about my fears, about missing Dad even though he was terrible. But you're never available for just talking anymore. You're only available when someone needs money. Isabella felt like she was standing in quicksand, every word she spoke making the situation worse. I want to hear about your life, Sophia. I want to be part of the family. But every time I try to connect, it seems like I'm doing something wrong. My gifts are too expensive, my help is too impersonal, my success makes everyone uncomfortable. Carmen shook her head with frustration that seemed years in the making. Your success doesn't make us uncomfortable, Isabella. Your attitude about your success makes us uncomfortable. You act like you're living in a different world from us, like our problems are too small for you to bother with unless they require writing checks. Isabella stood in her beautiful hotel lobby, surrounded by marble and crystal and fresh flowers, looking at her mother and sister who felt like strangers despite sharing her DNA, and realized that somewhere along the way, she had lost the ability to communicate with the people who should have known her best. I don't know how to fix this, Isabella said quietly. I don't know how to be successful without making you feel like I'm abandoning you. I don't know how to help without making it seem like I'm showing off. Tell me what you want from me, and I'll do it. Carmen's expression softened slightly, but her words remained painful. We want you to come home, Isabella. Not to visit, but to come home. We want you to remember that family is more important than business. We want you to stop hiding behind your money and your fancy hotels and just be our daughter, our sister. Isabella felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Come home. Mom, my work is here. My hotels, my employees, my life. I can't just abandon everything I've built. Sophia made a sound that was half sob, half bitter laugh. See? This is what we're talking about. You call it abandoning your business, but what do you call what you've done to us? When was the last time you spent a Sunday afternoon with us, not because it was someone's birthday or a holiday, but just because you wanted to be with your family? Isabella tried to remember and realized she couldn't. Every interaction with her family over the past few years had been scheduled around obligations, structured around events, mediated by gift-giving and careful politeness. I don't know, Isabella admitted. But that doesn't mean I don't love you. It doesn't mean I don't consider you my family. It just means my life is different now. Carmen stepped closer, reaching out to touch Isabella's arm. Different doesn't have to mean distant, Mija. Success doesn't have to mean isolation. But you've built walls around yourself that are made of more than money. They're made of assumptions about what we think about you, about what we can or can't understand about your life. Isabella felt tears threatening for the first time in months. Standing in her own lobby, surrounded by the empire she had built with her own hands and vision, she felt more lost than she had since those early days of eating cereal for dinner in her studio apartment. I don't know how to do this differently, Isabella whispered. I don't know how to be successful and still be the person you want me to be. Sophia moved closer, awkwardly because of her pregnancy, and took Isabella's hands. We don't want you to be smaller, Isabella. We want you to let us be part of your bigness. We want to understand what you do, to celebrate your wins, to help you carry your worries. But you shut us out every time we try. Isabella looked down at Sophia's hands holding hers, seeing her sister's chipped nail polish and the simple wedding ring that had cost less than Isabella spent on lunch most days. But Sophia's hands were warm, familiar, connected to memories of braiding each other's hair and sharing secrets under blankets during thunderstorms. I thought I was protecting you, Isabella said. I thought if I kept my work problems separate from family time, if I didn't burden you with business stress or make you feel bad about the differences in our situations, that would be better for everyone. Carmen shook her head sadly. Mija, love isn't protection from someone's real life. Love is being invited into someone's real life, the good parts and the hard parts and the boring parts. You've been giving us the highlight reel, not the actual story. Isabella felt something break open in her chest, Not the familiar crack but something larger, messier, more devastating. For years, she had been so focused on not making her family feel small that she had made herself unreachable instead. She had confused love with distance, protection with isolation. "I'm sorry," Isabella said, and meant it more deeply than she had meant anything in years. "I'm sorry I made you feel abandoned. I'm sorry I turned into someone you had to ask for help instead of someone you wanted to spend time with." The three women stood in the hotel lobby, crying together for the first time in years, grieving the relationship they had lost while trying to figure out how to build a new one. Isabella realized that her success had given her the power to solve her family's financial problems, but it had also given her the illusion that money could substitute for presence, that generosity could replace intimacy. "Can you forgive me?" Isabella asked, looking between her mother and sister. "Can we try to figure out how to do this differently?" Carmen smiled through her tears. "Of course we can forgive you, Mija. But forgiveness isn't enough. We need to rebuild trust. We need to learn how to be family members who happen to have very different lives, instead of strangers who happen to share DNA." Sophia squeezed Isabella's hands. "And it starts with you helping us save our house, not because you're writing a check to make a problem go away, but because you're part of solving a problem that affects people you love." Isabella nodded, feeling more hopeful than she had in months. "Yes. Absolutely. Let's go upstairs to my office and figure out exactly what needs to happen. And then, when the crisis is handled, maybe we can start having those Sunday afternoons again." That conversation in the hotel lobby should have been the beginning of healing. Isabella paid off Sophia and Diego's mortgage that night, not as a grand gesture but as an immediate solution that would give them space to rebuild their finances without the pressure of foreclosure. She carved out time in her schedule for weekly family dinners. She started sharing details about her work life, both the exciting parts and the stressful parts, treating her mother and sister like people who could understand her world if given the chance. For 3 months, it seemed like they had found a way forward. Isabella learned about Sophia's pregnancy fears and Diego's frustration with his injury. Carmen shared stories about her friends at work and her worries about retirement. Isabella talked about the challenges of managing multiple properties and her dreams of expanding to other cities. But healing old wounds is harder than acknowledging they exist. Despite everyone's good intentions, old patterns and assumptions kept surfacing in ways that derailed their progress. Carmen still worried aloud about Isabella's lack of a romantic relationship, framing it as concern but landing as criticism of Isabella's choices. Sophia still made comments about Isabella's expensive clothes or cars that felt pointed, even when they were meant to be teasing. Isabella still found herself walking on eggshells, editing stories about her success to avoid seeming boastful. The family dynamics that had developed over years couldn't be resolved with a few months of good intentions. Carmen and Sophia had spent so long seeing Isabella's success as somehow threatening or alienating that they couldn't fully let go of that narrative. Isabella had spent so long protecting herself from their judgment that she couldn't fully trust their acceptance. The fragile peace between them shattered completely during Sophia's baby shower, the second one Isabella had attended in 3 years. This time, Isabella was more careful about her gift, choosing something personal rather than expensive. She dressed more casually, trying to blend in rather than stand out. She thought she was being sensitive to the family dynamics they were trying to repair. But sensitivity, it turned out, could be misinterpreted as dramatically as insensitivity. Carmen's friends at the shower made comments about how nice it was that Isabella was keeping it simple for once, implying that her previous behavior had been inappropriate. Sophia's friends asked questions about Isabella's hotels that felt more like interrogation than genuine interest, as if they were trying to catch her in some act of arrogance. Isabella realized that no matter how she behaved, her success would be the lens through which her family and their social circle viewed every action. If she was generous, she was showing off. If she was restrained, she was being condescending. If she talked about her work, she was being self-centered. If she didn't talk about her work, she was being secretive. The final straw came when Carmen, in front of the entire shower, made a toast that was supposed to be supportive but felt like a backhanded compliment. To Sophia, who has always known what really matters in life. Family, love, being present for the people who need you. Some of us take longer to learn these lessons, but Sophia has always had her priorities straight. Isabella felt every woman in the room look at her, measuring her against her pregnant sister, finding her wanting. She excused herself to the bathroom and stood in the mirror, looking at her own reflection and wondering how many more times she could apologize for being successful, how many more ways she could contort herself to make other people comfortable with her achievements. When Isabella returned to the party, she participated politely but distantly. She helped clean up afterward, she hugged everyone goodbye, she promised to call soon. But something had shifted in her permanently that afternoon. She realized that her family's love, while genuine, was conditional on her making herself smaller, less threatening, more apologetic about the life she had built. That realization didn't make Isabella angry, exactly. It made her sad in a way that felt bottomless. She loved Carmen and Sophia deeply, but she was tired of feeling like she had to choose between their comfort and her authenticity. She was exhausted from trying to be successful enough to help them financially but not so successful that they felt diminished by comparison. Over the next 6 months, Isabella gradually pulled back again from family involvement. Not dramatically, not with any announcement or confrontation, but with the quiet withdrawal of someone who had learned that her presence created more tension than joy. She continued to provide financial support when needed, but she stopped trying to provide emotional intimacy that seemed unwelcome. Carmen and Sophia noticed Isabella's withdrawal and interpreted it as proof that Isabella's brief attempt at reconnect had been temporary, superficial, another example of Isabella's inability to prioritize family over business. They began talking about Isabella again as someone who had been changed by success, someone who couldn't maintain relationships with people who weren't as wealthy or sophisticated as her new social circle. These conversations, happening without Isabella's knowledge, rebuilt the narrative that Isabella was selfish, distant, more concerned with her hotels than with her family. By the time Sophia's second baby was born, Carmen and Sophia had convinced themselves that Isabella's absence from family events was evidence of arrogance rather than self-protection. Isabella, meanwhile, threw herself back into work with the fervor of someone trying to drown out emotional pain through achievement. She opened her 5th hotel, a luxury property in San Diego. She began developing a signature hotel chain that could be franchised to other markets. She was featured in Forbes as one of the most successful female entrepreneurs under 40. But professional success couldn't fill the hole left by family estrangement. Isabella found herself working 16-hour days not because her business demanded it, but because work was the only place where her value wasn't questioned, where her achievements were celebrated rather than apologized for. Isabella's isolation deepened when Carmen started telling extended family that Isabella had gotten too big for her britches and rarely visited anymore. These stories, repeated at family gatherings Isabella no longer attended, created a version of Isabella that bore little resemblance to the woman herself but became accepted truth among relatives who had no other source of information about her life. By Isabella's 35th birthday, she had become a stranger to her own family. Not through any single dramatic event, but through the gradual accumulation of misunderstandings, hurt feelings, and incompatible expectations. Isabella loved her mother and sister, but she had learned that love wasn't always enough to bridge fundamental differences in values and worldview. Carmen and Sophia loved Isabella too, but they had convinced themselves that the Isabella they loved was buried under layers of wealth and ambition, that the real Isabella would eventually remember what truly mattered and come home to them. They couldn't see that the Isabella building hotels and managing businesses was the same Isabella who had shared cereal with Sophia for breakfast 20 years earlier. Success hadn't changed Isabella's character, it had revealed capabilities that had always been there but had never before had space to grow. This fundamental misunderstanding, this inability to see each other clearly across the divide created by different life paths, set the stage for the confrontation that would change everything. Isabella's family had spent years constructing a narrative about her character that justified their resentment of her choices. Isabella had spent years protecting herself from their judgment while gradually losing hope that they could ever accept her fully. Neither side realized how completely they had misread the other's motivations. Carmen and Sophia thought Isabella's distance proved she cared more about money than family. Isabella thought their criticism proved they could never celebrate her success without feeling threatened by it. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force all three women to confront the gap between who they thought they were dealing with and who was actually standing in front of them. Isabella's family was about to discover that their assumptions about her priorities were not just wrong, but devastatingly, humiliatingly wrong. And Isabella was about to learn that sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't planning elaborate payback, but simply letting people discover the truth about what they've been destroying. The night that would change everything began with what should have been a celebration. Isabella had just completed the most significant business deal of her career, the purchase and planned restoration of the historic Millennium Grand Hotel, a landmark downtown property that had been closed for renovations for 3 years. The Millennium Grand wasn't just another hotel acquisition for Isabella. This was the property that had inspired her love of hospitality as a teenager, when she had snuck away from family obligations to walk through the lobby and imagine what it would be like to create spaces that made people feel elegant, important, welcomed. The hotel had been built in 1925, a masterpiece of architecture and design that had hosted movie premieres, political gatherings, and society weddings for nearly a century. When the property went on the market, Isabella didn't just want it, she needed it. This hotel represented the pinnacle of everything she had been working toward, the crown jewel that would establish her not just as a successful businesswoman, but as someone who preserved and celebrated the history of her city. The purchase price was $32 million. Isabella had leveraged everything she owned, taken on debt that would have terrified her younger self, and committed to a restoration project that would take 3 years and cost an additional $18 million. If the project succeeded, Isabella would own the most prestigious hotel in Los Angeles. If it failed, she would lose everything she had spent 15 years building. Isabella had spent the day finalizing contracts and meeting with architects, her mind buzzing with plans for bringing the Millennium Grand back to its original grandeur while adding modern luxury that would make it competitive with the world's finest hotels. She was exhausted but exhilarated, running on adrenaline and the satisfaction of having achieved something that had seemed impossible just 6 months earlier. She decided to drive by the property one more time before going home, just to see it with fresh eyes now that it officially belonged to her. Isabella parked across the street from the hotel and sat in her car for 10 minutes, looking up at the building that represented everything she had dreamed of achieving. The Millennium Grand rose 22 stories above downtown Los Angeles, its Art Deco facade still magnificent despite years of neglect. The marquee that had once announced famous guests and events was dark now, waiting for restoration. The valet parking area was blocked off with construction barriers. But Isabella could see past the current state to what the building would become under her vision and investment. This hotel would be her legacy, the project that would establish her reputation not just in Los Angeles but internationally. Isabella had already been contacted by hospitality magazines wanting to document the restoration process. Travel bloggers were speculating about opening dates. Interior designers were submitting proposals for spaces that didn't even exist yet. Isabella was so absorbed in studying the building's facade, imagining how it would look with the original neon restored and the marble entrance gleaming again, that she almost didn't notice the figures approaching the hotel's main entrance. But something about the body language of the two women walking up the steps made Isabella look more closely. Even from across the street, even in the dim light from street lamps, there was something familiar about the way they moved, the shape of their silhouettes. Isabella's heart stopped when she realized she was looking at her mother and sister. Carmen and Sophia were dressed more formally than Isabella had seen them in years. Carmen wore a black dress that Isabella didn't recognize, possibly new, definitely more expensive than her usual wardrobe. Sophia wore a dark blue maternity dress that showed off her pregnancy elegantly. Both women were carrying small purses and walking with the careful confidence of people who belonged in upscale establishments. Isabella watched, confused and curious, as her mother and sister approached the hotel entrance. The Millennium Grand had been closed for 3 years. There were construction barriers, security fencing, and signs clearly indicating that the building was not open to the public. What were Carmen and Sophia doing here? As Isabella watched, a security guard approached her mother and sister. Isabella couldn't hear the conversation from across the street, but she could see the body language. The guard was explaining that the hotel was closed. Carmen and Sophia were gesturing toward the entrance as if they expected to be admitted. The interaction continued for several minutes, with Carmen becoming increasingly animated in her gesturing. Sophia stood slightly behind her mother, one hand on her pregnant belly, the other holding her purse like a shield. Finally, the security guard shook his head definitively and walked away, leaving Carmen and Sophia standing at the bottom of the hotel steps. Isabella was torn between curiosity and the desire to avoid another awkward family encounter. She had spent months rebuilding walls around her heart after their failed attempt at reconciliation. Seeing Carmen and Sophia unexpectedly, especially at the hotel that represented her greatest achievement, felt like an invasion of the one space where Isabella felt purely successful. But as Isabella watched her mother and sister stand uncertainly at the hotel entrance, looking lost and slightly embarrassed, she felt the pull of old instincts. Whatever they were doing here, wherever they had been planning to go, they needed help. Isabella got out of her car and crossed the street, approaching her mother and sister from behind. She was close enough to hear their conversation before they noticed her presence. "I don't understand," Sophia was saying to Carmen. "Maria said the restaurant was definitely in this hotel. She said it was fancy, expensive, the kind of place where you need reservations weeks in advance." Carmen was digging through her purse with frustrated movements. "Let me call her again. Maybe we have the wrong entrance, or maybe it moved." Isabella realized that her mother and sister were looking for a restaurant, probably meeting friends or celebrating some occasion that Isabella hadn't been told about. They were dressed up, they had made plans, and now those plans were falling apart because they had been given incorrect information about a location. Under normal circumstances, Isabella would have approached immediately, offered to help them find the right restaurant or suggested alternatives. But these weren't normal circumstances. Isabella's relationship with her family was so fragile, so loaded with potential for misunderstanding, that she hesitated. If she helped them now, would Carmen and Sophia appreciate the assistance or feel embarrassed that Isabella had witnessed their confusion? Would they interpret her presence as coincidence or assume she was somehow checking up on them? Would they be grateful for her local knowledge of restaurants, or would they feel patronized by her expertise about upscale dining venues they rarely visited? While Isabella debated how to approach the situation, Carmen's phone call apparently provided some clarity. Isabella heard her mother's voice carry across the quiet street. "Oh, I see. Yes, we definitely have the wrong hotel. The Millennium Grand is closed for construction, but the restaurant is at the Grand Millennium, which is completely different. Yes, we can take a taxi." Carmen hung up and turned to Sophia with visible relief. "We're at the wrong place, Mija. The restaurant is at the Grand Millennium Hotel, not the Millennium Grand Hotel. They sound almost the same, but they're different buildings." Sophia laughed, the kind of relieved laughter that follows minor panic. "Thank God. I was starting to think Maria had made the whole thing up. How far is the right hotel?" Carmen was already looking around for a taxi, but the area around the closed Millennium Grand was not prime territory for finding rides. The neighborhood was a mix of construction zones and office buildings that emptied out after business hours. Isabella watched her mother and sister realize they were stranded in downtown Los Angeles at night, dressed up for dinner reservations they were now going to miss, in an area where they couldn't easily find transportation. This was exactly the kind of situation where Isabella's resources and local knowledge could solve the problem immediately. But it was also exactly the kind of situation where her help might be interpreted as showing off, as evidence that Isabella moved through the world with privileges that made her family's struggles seem small and manageable. Isabella took a deep breath and made a decision that she hoped was motivated by love rather than guilt. "Mom!" "Sophia." Both women spun around, startled to hear Isabella's voice. In the moment before recognition and social conditioning took over their expressions, Isabella saw genuine fear cross both their faces. Two women, alone in an unfamiliar area at night, hearing an unexpected voice behind them. But then recognition set in, followed immediately by the complex mix of emotions that had characterized all their recent interactions: surprise, embarrassment, defensiveness, and underneath it all, the complicated love of family members who couldn't quite figure out how to relate to each other anymore. "Isabella." Carmen's voice was too bright, too cheerful, the tone of someone caught in an awkward situation who was trying to pretend everything was normal. "What a coincidence. What are you doing downtown so late?" Isabella gestured toward the Millennium Grand behind them. I was just checking on a property. What about you two? Are you okay? I heard something about looking for a restaurant. Sophia stepped forward, one hand still protectively over her pregnant belly. We're meeting Maria and her husband for dinner. It was supposed to be at this hotel, but apparently we got the name confused. It's at the Grand Millennium, not the Millennium Grand. Isabella nodded, understanding the confusion. That happens all the time. Those hotels do have confusingly similar names. The Grand Millennium is about 15 blocks from here, in the financial district. Did you drive, or do you need help getting there? Carmen's expression shifted into something that looked defensive. We took an Uber here, so we'll just call another one to take us to the right place. Thank you though. Isabella watched her mother fumble with her phone, obviously struggling with the rideshare app, and felt the familiar frustration of wanting to help but knowing that help might not be welcomed in the spirit it was intended. Mom, let me just give you a ride. My car is right across the street, I know exactly where the Grand Millennium is, and I can have you there in 10 minutes instead of waiting for another Uber that might take 20 minutes to arrive and then get stuck in traffic. Carmen looked at Sophia, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Isabella could practically see the internal debate, accept help from Isabella and risk owing her something, or struggle with technology and transportation and risk missing their dinner plans entirely. We don't want to impose, Sophia said carefully. I'm sure you have somewhere important to be. Isabella felt the familiar sting of being treated like her time was more valuable than family connection, as if offering a ride was an inconvenience rather than an expression of care. I don't have anywhere to be. I was just heading home, and the Grand Millennium is on my way. Please, let me give you a ride. It's no trouble at all. Carmen and Sophia exchanged another look, and Isabella realized they were having the same internal debate she had been having, how to navigate this interaction without creating new sources of tension or misunderstanding. Finally, Carmen smiled with what looked like genuine warmth. That would be very helpful, Mija. Thank you. The three women walked across the street to Isabella's car, and Isabella tried to see the situation through her mother and sister's eyes. Isabella was driving a new Mercedes, not flashy but obviously expensive, obviously chosen for comfort and reliability rather than basic transportation. Her work clothes were tailored, professional, the kind of outfit that signaled success without trying to impress anyone. To Carmen and Sophia, Isabella's appearance probably reinforced their narrative about the life Isabella had chosen, prioritizing material success, moving in circles where image mattered more than authenticity, becoming someone whose casual generosity highlighted the gap between their financial realities. To Isabella, her car and clothes were simply tools of her profession, no different from a carpenter's hammer or a teacher's textbooks. She needed reliable transportation to travel between properties. She needed professional attire to meet with investors and vendors and guests who expected their hotel owner to look the part. But she was aware that these explanations, even if offered, would sound defensive. So Isabella kept the conversation light as they drove through downtown Los Angeles toward the Grand Millennium Hotel. How's the new baby doing? Isabella asked, catching Sophia's eye in the rearview mirror. Sophia's face softened in the way it always did when she talked about her children. Good, I think. Active. This one moves around so much more than Carmen did at this stage. Diego thinks it's going to be a boy. Isabella smiled genuinely. Are you hoping for a boy or a girl? Honestly, I'm hoping for healthy. I'm 31 now, and this pregnancy feels harder than the first one. I get tired so much faster, and my back aches constantly. Carmen reached back to pat Sophia's knee. That's normal, Mija. Second pregnancies are always different. And you're chasing a toddler around now, which you didn't have to do the first time. Isabella found herself relaxing as they talked about Sophia's pregnancy, Diego's work, Carmen's plans for retirement. This was the kind of conversation she had missed, the ordinary sharing of daily life that had been so difficult to maintain across the gap created by their different circumstances. When they arrived at the Grand Millennium, Isabella pulled up to the valet station and put the car in park. Here you are. The restaurant is on the second floor, Chez Laurent. It's supposed to be excellent. Carmen reached for her purse. Isabella, Let us pay for valet parking, since you went out of your way to bring us here. Isabella waved off the offer. Don't worry about it. I hope you have a wonderful dinner. But instead of getting out of the car immediately, Carmen and Sophia sat for a moment, some kind of silent communication happening between them again. Finally, Carmen turned to look at Isabella directly. Isabella, would you like to join us for dinner? I'm sure Maria and her husband wouldn't mind, and it might be nice to spend some time together outside of family obligations. Isabella felt her heart skip with surprised hope. This was the kind of spontaneous invitation she had been missing for years, the casual inclusion that made her feel like family rather than like a distant relative who was tolerated at formal gatherings. But Isabella also knew that joining Carmen and Sophia for dinner would mean intruding on plans they had made with friends, potentially making everyone uncomfortable, definitely changing the dynamic of what was supposed to be their evening out. That's so sweet of you to offer, but I wouldn't want to crash your dinner with friends. Besides, I'm not exactly dressed for Chez Laurent. Carmen looked at Isabella's professional attire with an expression Isabella couldn't quite read. You look fine, Mija. You always look fine. Maybe too fine sometimes. There it was again, the backhanded compliment that managed to praise and criticize simultaneously. Isabella felt her good mood deflate slightly, reminding her why these interactions were so difficult to navigate. I just meant that you probably made reservations for 4 people, not 5, and good restaurants don't like last-minute changes to party size. Sophia leaned forward from the back seat. Isabella, can I ask you something? And I want you to answer honestly, not just say what you think we want to hear. Isabella felt her defenses rise, but she nodded. Of course. Do you not want to spend time with us, or do you just not know how to spend time with us anymore? Because sometimes it feels like you're looking for reasons to say no when we try to include you in things. Isabella sat in her expensive car outside a luxury hotel, looking at her pregnant sister and her aging mother, and realized they were all trying to solve the same puzzle from different angles. I want to spend time with you, Isabella said quietly. I want that more than almost anything. But I never know if I'm going to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing or somehow make you feel bad just by existing in the space I've built for myself. It's easier to say no than to risk another evening where I end up apologizing for having the life I have. Carmen's expression softened in a way Isabella hadn't seen in years. Mija, we don't want you to apologize for your life. We want you to share your life. There's a difference. Isabella felt tears threaten for the second time in recent memory. I don't always know what the difference is anymore. Sophia reached forward and squeezed Isabella's shoulder. Come to dinner with us. If it's awkward, we'll leave early and blame my pregnancy. If Maria and her husband are weird about an extra person, we'll go somewhere else. But don't say no just because you're afraid it won't be perfect. Isabella looked at her sister and mother, these 2 women who had shaped her understanding of love and family and belonging, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and essential. Okay. Yes. I'd love to have dinner with you. The evening that followed was not perfect, but it was real in a way Isabella had almost forgotten family interactions could be. Maria and her husband were gracious about the unexpected addition to their party, the restaurant accommodated the extra person without drama, and the conversation flowed in ways that reminded Isabella why she had missed these women so much. Isabella learned that Sophia was considering going back to school to become a nurse once the new baby was old enough for day care. She learned that Carmen was dating someone, a widower from her church who made her laugh and brought her flowers from his garden. She learned that Diego had been promoted to shift supervisor and was taking night classes to learn business management. Isabella shared stories about her hotels that focused on the people rather than the profits, the elderly couple who renewed their vows at the Sunset Manor every year on their anniversary, the movie star who insisted on staying in the same suite whenever she was in Los Angeles because the view reminded her of her hometown, the business traveler who had become so attached to one of Isabella's properties that he had started scheduling meetings around his ability to stay there. As the evening progressed, Isabella realized that she had been editing herself for so long that she had forgotten how to just exist naturally in her family's presence. She had been so focused on not making them feel bad about the differences in their situations that she had stopped sharing the parts of her life that might have brought them joy. Carmen and Sophia, meanwhile, seemed to relax as they realized Isabella was still fundamentally the same person they had always known. Success hadn't changed her sense of humor or her interest in their lives or her tendency to worry about everyone else's comfort before her own. By the time dessert arrived, Isabella felt cautiously optimistic that maybe they had found a way forward. Maybe the key was just spending time together without agenda, without trying to solve relationship problems or address old hurts, just being present with each other in the moment. But as they were finishing dinner, Carmen brought up a topic that reminded Isabella how fragile this new peace really was. "Isabella, I've been thinking about something, and I hope you won't take this the wrong way. But Sophia and I were talking about how hard it must be for you to maintain all these business responsibilities by yourself. Have you ever thought about bringing family into the business? Not in big ways, but maybe Sophia could help with marketing or event planning, areas where her skills would be useful." Isabella felt her stomach clench. This was the conversation she had been dreading, the one where her family's inclusion in her life came with expectations about sharing her professional success. That's an interesting idea," Isabella said carefully. "But my hotels require very specific experience and training. It's not really the kind of business where family members can just step in and help." Sophia's expression shifted slightly, disappointment flickering across her face. "I wasn't suggesting you give me a job I'm not qualified for, Isabella. I was thinking more about areas where my existing skills might be useful. I do have experience with customer service and event coordination." Isabella realized she had handled the suggestion badly, making it sound like she didn't think Sophia was capable of contributing meaningfully to professional environments. "I didn't mean to imply you weren't qualified. I just meant that the hospitality industry is very specialized, and it takes time to learn the systems and standards that luxury hotels require." Carmen jumped in with what was clearly meant to be supportive. "Of course it would take training. But family businesses are often the most successful because everyone is invested in making them work. And it might give you someone you can trust to help share the load." Isabella felt the familiar sensation of being backed into a corner, pressured to make decisions about her business based on family dynamics rather than professional needs. "It's not about trust," Isabella said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "It's about having the right person in the right position with the right training and experience. These hotels represent 15 years of work and $50 million in investment. I can't make staffing decisions based on family relationships rather than qualifications." The table went quiet in a way that felt loaded, uncomfortable. Isabella realized that her explanation, while factually accurate, had come across as dismissive of her family's capabilities and insulting to their intelligence. Sophia put down her dessert fork and looked at Isabella with an expression that mixed hurt with something that looked like recognition. "I wasn't asking you to hire me as general manager, Isabella. I was asking if there might be ways I could contribute to something that matters to you, ways we could be part of your success instead of just beneficiaries of it. But I can see that's not what you want." Isabella felt panic rise in her throat. "That's not true. I do want you to be part of my success. But I want to include you in ways that make sense for everyone, not just because we're related." Carmen reached across the table and touched Isabella's hand, but her expression was sad in a way that felt like disappointment. "Mija, sometimes it feels like you've built a wall around your work that's so high we can't even see over it, much less be invited inside. We're not asking you to compromise your standards or risk your investment. We're asking you to consider that maybe family members who love you and want to see you succeed might have something valuable to offer." Isabella looked around the table at the faces of the women she loved most in the world and realized that no matter what she said, she was going to hurt their feelings. If she maintained her position that her business required professional staffing decisions, she would seem cold and dismissive. If she agreed to consider family involvement without meaning it, she would be patronizing and dishonest. "Can I think about it?" Isabella asked finally. "Can we table this conversation for now and just enjoy the rest of dinner together?" Carmen and Sophia agreed, but the easy warmth of the earlier conversation didn't return. They finished dessert politely, they split the check despite Isabella's offers to pay, they exchanged hugs and promises to get together again soon. But Isabella drove home knowing that the evening had ended with more distance between them, not less. Once again, She had failed to find the right balance between protecting her professional judgment and honoring her family relationships. Isabella spent the next few days replaying the dinner conversation, trying to figure out how she could have handled Sophia's suggestion differently. Maybe she could have asked more questions about what kind of role Sophia envisioned, or explained in more detail why hospitality management required specific experience. Maybe she could have suggested that Sophia get training in hotel operations before they discussed potential opportunities. But Isabella also knew that the real issue wasn't Sophia's qualifications or the feasibility of family employment. The real issue was that Carmen and Sophia wanted to be invited into Isabella's success in ways that felt meaningful to them, while Isabella wanted to protect the business she had built from the complications that family involvement inevitably created. Neither perspective was wrong, exactly, but they were incompatible in ways that seemed impossible to resolve. Isabella was still thinking about this dilemma a week later when she received a phone call that would change everything. Carmen called on a Thursday afternoon, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Isabella, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without getting defensive or trying to fix it immediately." Isabella felt her stomach drop. "What's wrong? Is everyone okay?" "Everyone is physically fine. But Sophia and Diego are getting divorced." Isabella sat down hard in her office chair, stunned by news she hadn't seen coming despite all the family dinners and conversations of recent months. "What happened? I thought they were doing better since Diego got promoted." Carmen sighed in a way that suggested this conversation was going to be longer and more complicated than a simple announcement. The promotion was part of the problem. Diego started making more money and decided that meant he could start making unilateral decisions about their finances and their future. He bought a motorcycle without discussing it with Sophia. He made plans to move them to a bigger house without asking what she wanted. He started acting like being the breadwinner meant being the boss of the family. Isabella felt anger rise on her sister's behalf. "That's completely unacceptable. How is Sophia handling it?" "She's devastated but determined. She's moving back in with me temporarily, bringing little Carmen. The divorce should be final in a few months, but Diego is being difficult about child support and property division." Isabella's mind immediately shifted into problem-solving mode. "Does she need a lawyer? I can recommend someone excellent, someone who specializes in family law and has a reputation for protecting women's interests in divorce proceedings." Carmen was quiet for a moment before responding. "Isabella, before you start trying to fix this situation, I need you to understand something. Sophia specifically asked me not to tell you about the divorce because she was afraid you would take over and try to solve everything with money and lawyers and resources she can't reciprocate." Isabella felt like she had been slapped. "So she doesn't want my help? She wants your support. She wants your love and your presence and your understanding. But she's afraid that if she accepts your help with the practical problems, you'll take over the situation and she'll end up feeling like a charity case rather than your sister." Isabella felt the familiar frustration of being misunderstood, but this time it was mixed with genuine confusion about how to navigate the situation appropriately. "Mom, I don't understand what you want from me. You're telling me that Sophia is going through a divorce, probably needs legal help and financial support, but she doesn't want me to offer the resources I have available because it might make her feel bad. How am I supposed to show love and support without actually helping?" Carmen's voice softened with something that sounded like sympathy. "Mija, you're thinking about this like a business problem that needs to be solved efficiently. But family problems aren't business problems. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone struggle with their own solutions while you just stand beside them." Isabella stared out her office window at the city skyline, trying to understand how withholding help could be more loving than providing it. What if Sophia makes mistakes because she doesn't have access to the best legal advice? What if she accepts a settlement that's unfair because she can't afford to fight for better terms? How is it loving to watch someone you care about get taken advantage of when you could prevent it? Because sometimes people need to feel capable of handling their own lives, even when the process is messier and harder than it would be with help. Sophia has been living in the shadow of your success for years now. This divorce is awful, but it's also the first time in a long time that she has to figure out who she is and what she's capable of on her own. Isabella felt a surge of frustration that was part anger, part heartbreak. So I'm supposed to pretend I don't have resources that could help her. I'm supposed to watch her struggle with problems I could solve, just so she can feel independent. You're supposed to let her ask for what she needs instead of assuming you know what she needs. You're supposed to trust that she's smart enough to figure out when she's in over her head and needs professional help. Isabella ended the phone call feeling more confused than ever about how to love her family appropriately. Every instinct she had developed as a successful businesswoman told her that problems should be addressed quickly and efficiently with the best resources available. But her family seemed to interpret this approach as disrespectful, controlling, evidence that Isabella didn't trust their judgment or value their independence. Over the following weeks, Isabella tried to follow Carmen's advice. When Sophia called crying about divorce proceedings, Isabella listened without immediately offering solutions. When Sophia mentioned struggling to find affordable childcare while she looked for a new job, Isabella asked supportive questions instead of providing referrals to nanny services. But this approach felt unnatural and forced to Isabella. She found herself editing every response, second-guessing every offer of assistance, constantly worried that she was being too helpful or not helpful enough. The spontaneity and ease she had always felt in relationships was replaced by careful calculation about what kind of support would be welcomed versus what would be perceived as interference. Meanwhile, Isabella could hear the strain in Sophia's voice during their phone calls. Her sister was exhausted from managing divorce proceedings while caring for a toddler and looking for work. Sophia was making mistakes that could have been avoided with better legal advice, accepting settlement offers that Isabella knew were inadequate, struggling with practical problems that Isabella could have solved with a phone call. 3 months into Sophia's divorce proceedings, the situation reached a crisis point. Diego had hidden assets during the marriage, leaving Sophia with less financial support than she was legally entitled to. He was also fighting for joint custody despite having shown little interest in hands-on parenting during their marriage, apparently because shared custody would reduce his child support obligations. Sophia called Isabella on a Friday night, sobbing so hard she could barely speak. "Isabella, I don't know what to do. Diego's lawyer is saying I have to accept his offer or he'll fight for full custody. He's claiming I'm an unfit mother because I'm living with mom instead of having my own place, because I don't have a job yet, because I've been depressed since the separation." Isabella felt rage surge through her body like electricity. "Sophia, that's complete bullshit. Living with family during a difficult transition doesn't make you an unfit mother. Being unemployed while you're dealing with divorce proceedings doesn't make you an unfit mother. Being depressed about your marriage ending is completely normal and doesn't reflect on your parenting abilities. I know that, but his lawyer is making it sound like the court will see it differently. My lawyer says we can fight it, but it will cost money I don't have and time I can't afford to spend away from Carmen while she's adjusting to the separation." Isabella took a deep breath and made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. "Sophia, I'm going to say something, and I want you to really listen before you respond. I have resources that can help you. I know lawyers who specialize in exactly this kind of case, who have reputations for protecting mothers' rights and exposing fathers who use custody threats as financial weapons. I have money to pay for legal fees so you don't have to choose between fighting for what you deserve and providing for your daughter." Isabella continued before Sophia could interrupt. "I know you want to handle this yourself, and I respect that. But this isn't about independence anymore. This is about Diego trying to manipulate you into accepting less than you're entitled to because he knows you can't afford to fight back. That's not a fair contest. And watching it happen isn't loving support, it's enabling injustice." Sophia was quiet for so long that Isabella wondered if the call had been disconnected. "Sophia? Are you there? I'm here." Sophia's voice was thick with tears but steadier than it had been. "Isabella, if I let you help me, it has to be real help, not you taking over my life. I need to understand what's happening, I need to make the decisions, I need to feel like I'm still in control of my own situation." Isabella felt relief flood through her chest. "Absolutely. You're the client, you make the decisions. I'm just providing access to resources you wouldn't otherwise have. And this doesn't make me a charity case. This makes me your sister who's in trouble and accepting help from family." "Yes. Exactly, yes. Within a week, Isabella had connected Sophia with one of Los Angeles's most respected family law attorneys, a woman who had built her career on protecting the rights of mothers in contentious divorce cases. The lawyer took one look at Diego's demands and Sophia's situation and immediately filed motions that stopped Diego's intimidation tactics cold. Within a month, Sophia had a settlement that provided fair financial support and a custody arrangement that reflected the actual history of childcare responsibilities in the marriage. Diego's threats to fight for full custody evaporated when his own lawyer explained that his chances of success were essentially zero. Sophia called Isabella the day the divorce was finalized, her voice lighter than it had been in months. "Isabella, I need to say something to you, and I need you to hear it completely. I was wrong to ask Mom not to tell you about the divorce initially. I was wrong to think that accepting your help would make me weak or dependent. And I was wrong to assume that your success meant you couldn't understand what I was going through." Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. "You weren't wrong to want to handle your own problems, Sophia. You weren't wrong to want to feel capable and independent. But I was wrong to think that those things required rejecting help from someone who loves me and has resources I don't have. The lawyer you connected me with didn't just solve my legal problems, she taught me how to advocate for myself. The money you provided didn't make me dependent, it made me free to fight for what I deserved instead of accepting what I was offered out of desperation." Isabella sat in her office, looking out at the city where she had built her empire, feeling something shift in her understanding of how love and success could coexist. "I'm so proud of you for getting through this, Sophia. I'm proud of you for making the hard decisions and standing up for yourself and Carmen. I couldn't have done it without you. And not just because of the money and the lawyer, but because knowing you believed I deserved better gave me the strength to believe it too." That conversation marked a turning point in Isabella's relationship with her family. Not because all their problems were solved, but because they had finally found a way for Isabella's resources to support her family's independence rather than undermining it. Over the following months, Carmen and Sophia began asking Isabella for advice about things they had never discussed with her before: financial planning, investment strategies, career development. Not because they wanted Isabella to solve their problems, but because they recognized that her experience and expertise were valuable resources they had been too proud or too intimidated to access. Isabella, meanwhile, began sharing more details about the challenges of running her business empire. She talked about difficult personnel decisions, regulatory hurdles, the stress of managing multiple properties during economic uncertainty. Carmen and Sophia couldn't solve these problems for Isabella, but they could listen, offer perspective, and remind her that success didn't require carrying every burden alone. For the first time in years, Isabella felt like she had a family that could celebrate her achievements without feeling threatened by them, and support her struggles without feeling inadequate to help. But this newfound harmony, this careful balance between independence and interdependence, was about to be tested in ways none of them could have anticipated. The crisis began with what should have been Isabella's greatest professional triumph. The restoration of the Millennium Grand Hotel was completed ahead of schedule and under budget, an achievement that had attracted international attention from hospitality industry publications and luxury travel bloggers. The hotel's grand reopening was scheduled for a Saturday night in November, a black tie event that would host 300 guests including city officials, industry leaders, celebrity investors, and travel journalists from around the world. This wasn't just a party. It was Isabella's introduction to the global hospitality market, her announcement that she was ready to expand her empire beyond Los Angeles. Isabella had spent months planning every detail of the reopening event. The restored ballroom would showcase 1920s elegance with modern luxury touches. The menu featured dishes created by James Beard award-winning chefs, who had designed signature offerings for the hotel's 3 restaurants. The entertainment included a jazz quartet that had performed at the White House and a string ensemble that regularly played at Lincoln Center. More importantly, Isabella had confirmed attendance from investors who were interested in partnering with her on projects in New York, Miami, and San Francisco. Hotel management companies had expressed interest in licensing her restoration and design concepts. Travel magazine editors were planning feature stories that would establish Isabella as one of the country's premier boutique hotel developers. This single event represented everything Isabella had been working toward for 15 years. Success here would mean financial security, international recognition, and opportunities to build the kind of legacy that would outlast her lifetime. 2 days before the reopening, Isabella called Carmen and Sophia to finalize their plans for attending the event. "I'm so excited for you to see the hotel completed," Isabella said during a 3-way phone call. "The ballroom looks like something from a movie set, and the presidential suite has a view of the entire city skyline. I think you're going to be amazed by what we've accomplished." Carmen's response was enthusiastic but included a concern Isabella hadn't anticipated. "We're excited too, Mija. But Sophia and I have been talking, and we're a little worried about fitting in with your other guests. This sounds like a very fancy event, and we don't want to embarrass you or feel out of place." Isabella felt her heart clench. "Mom, you couldn't embarrass me. You're my family, and I want you there to celebrate this achievement with me. I want you to meet the people I work with and see what we've built together." Sophia jumped into the conversation. "Isabella, we want to be there for you, but we also want to be honest about our concerns. Your business associates are going to be wealthy, sophisticated people who are comfortable in luxury environments. We're going to be the relatives who don't know which fork to use for the salad course." Isabella realized that her family's insecurities about the social aspects of her success hadn't disappeared just because they had found better ways to navigate the practical aspects. "Sophia, this isn't about knowing etiquette rules or having expensive clothes. This is about the people who love me most being present for one of the most important nights of my career. I don't care if you feel awkward or out of place. I care that you're there." Carmen's voice carried a note of sadness that Isabella recognized from their earlier conflicts. "Mija, sometimes caring isn't enough. Sometimes love means recognizing when our presence might create more stress than joy." Isabella felt panic rise in her throat. After everything they had been through, after all the progress they had made in understanding each other, her family was going to miss the most important event of her career because they were intimidated by her success. "Please don't do this," Isabella said, not caring that her voice was shaking. "Please don't let fear keep you away from something that matters to me this much. I need you there. Not because I need you to impress anyone or prove anything, but because I need the people who knew me before I was successful to witness what I've become." Carmen and Sophia were quiet for a long moment, and Isabella could practically hear them having a silent conversation about how to respond. Finally, Sophia spoke. "Okay. We'll be there. But you have to promise us something. Anything. Promise us that you won't spend the evening worrying about whether we're comfortable or trying to manage how we interact with your business associates. Promise us that you'll focus on your achievement and let us handle our own social anxieties." Isabella felt relief flood through her chest. "I promise. Thank you for being willing to be there even though it feels scary. That's what family does," Carmen said. "We show up for each other, even when it's uncomfortable." The night of the Millennium Grand reopening was everything Isabella had envisioned and more. The restored hotel was magnificent, a perfect blend of historical grandeur and contemporary luxury that made guests gasp when they entered the lobby. The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers and candlelight, creating an atmosphere that was both elegant and warm. Isabella moved through the party in a custom-designed gown that made her feel like the queen of her own empire, greeting investors and journalists and city officials who praised her vision and business acumen. Every conversation confirmed that the evening was accomplishing its professional goals, establishing Isabella's reputation on a national stage and opening doors to expansion opportunities that would multiply her success exponentially. But the moments Isabella treasured most were the ones she spent watching Carmen and Sophia experience the world she had created. Her mother stood in the restored lobby with tears in her eyes, running her hands along marble columns and Art Deco fixtures that Isabella had spent years returning to their original beauty. Sophia moved through the party with growing confidence, her natural charm and intelligence making her a favorite conversation partner for several of Isabella's business associates. Most importantly, Isabella could see pride in both women's faces as they watched her command the room, as they listened to industry leaders describe Isabella's achievements in terms that made it impossible to dismiss her success as luck or accident. During the evening's formal program, Isabella was introduced as the visionary behind the hotel's restoration, the entrepreneur who had transformed a neglected landmark into a destination that would attract visitors from around the world. As she stood at the podium looking out at 300 people who were applauding her achievements, Isabella found Carmen and Sophia in the crowd. The expression on their faces was everything Isabella had been hoping to see for years: unconditional pride, genuine amazement, complete understanding of what she had accomplished and why it mattered. Isabella's speech that night was the best of her career, passionate and confident and filled with gratitude for the teams and partners who had made the restoration possible. But the moment that mattered most to her came after the formal program, when Carmen approached her with tears streaming down her face. "Mija, I owe you an apology. I've spent years worrying that success was changing you into someone I couldn't relate to, someone who didn't need family anymore. But tonight, watching you move through this room, seeing how much people respect what you've built, I realized that success didn't change who you are. It revealed who you were all along." Sophia joined them, wrapping Isabella in a hug that was fierce and protective and proud. "Isabella, I understand now why you couldn't just walk away from your hotels to come work at a salon or focus on finding a husband. This isn't just your job or your business. This is your calling, your art, your contribution to the world. I'm sorry it took me so long to see that." Isabella stood in her beautiful ballroom, surrounded by the tangible evidence of everything she had achieved, holding the two women who had shaped her understanding of love and family and belonging, and felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. But this moment of perfect harmony, this feeling that all the conflicts and misunderstandings of the past had been resolved, was about to be shattered by a revelation that would change everything. The evening was winding down, most guests had departed, and Isabella was saying goodbye to the last few investors and journalists when her head of security approached her with an expression that immediately put her on alert. "Ms. Martinez, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention." Isabella excused herself from her conversation and followed her security chief to a quiet corner of the lobby. "What kind of situation?" "There's been a break-in at the Sunset Manor. Someone bypassed our security system and accessed your private office. Nothing appears to have been stolen, but files were disturbed and your computer was accessed." Isabella felt ice water rush through her veins. The Sunset Manor was her original hotel, her first successful property, but it also served as the headquarters for her entire business empire. Her office there contained confidential information about all her properties, financial records, employee files, expansion plans, and investor communications. How is that possible? That system was installed by the same company that handles security for major banks. That's what concerns us. This wasn't a random break-in or an opportunistic crime. Someone with sophisticated technical knowledge and specific information about our security protocols gained access to areas that should have been impossible to breach. Isabella's mind raced through possibilities, none of them comforting. Corporate espionage, identity theft, competitors trying to steal business plans, disgruntled employees seeking revenge. "Have you called the police?" "Yes, they're processing the scene now." "But Ms. Martinez, there's something else you need to know. The intruder left behind an envelope addressed to you personally. The police have cleared it for safety, but they want you to review the contents." Isabella took the envelope with hands that weren't quite steady. Her name was written across the front in handwriting that looked familiar but that she couldn't immediately place. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper with a message that made Isabella's world tilt on its axis. "Isabella, you think you're so smart, so successful, so much better than the family that raised you. But you're not as untouchable as you believe. Your empire is built on secrets that could destroy everything if the right people knew the truth. We know who you really are, and we know what you're hiding. Pay attention to what happens next." The letter was unsigned, but something about the tone, the phrasing, the specific references to family and secrets, made Isabella's stomach clench with a horrible suspicion. She read the message 3 more times, trying to make sense of threats that seemed both vague and terrifyingly specific. What secrets? What truth? Isabella had built her business through legitimate means, honest dealing, transparent financial practices. She had no hidden criminal activity, no buried scandals that could be exposed. But the reference to family felt personal in a way that suggested this wasn't random corporate sabotage. Someone who knew Isabella personally, who resented her success specifically, who felt she had abandoned or betrayed people who mattered to her. Isabella looked across the hotel lobby where Carmen and Sophia were saying goodbye to the last few guests, both women glowing with pride and excitement from the evening's success. The idea that her own family members could be involved in threatening her business was almost too painful to consider. But as Isabella watched her mother and sister, she noticed something that sent fresh ice through her veins. Sophia was carrying a purse that Isabella had never seen before, expensive leather that didn't match anything else in Sophia's wardrobe. Carmen was wearing jewelry that looked like real diamonds, not the costume pieces she usually favored for special occasions. Isabella tried to tell herself that these observations meant nothing. Maybe Sophia had bought a new purse for the special occasion. Maybe Carmen had borrowed jewelry from a friend, or maybe Isabella simply hadn't noticed these items before. But combined with the threatening letter, combined with the sophisticated nature of the break-in, combined with the personal tone of the threats, Isabella couldn't ignore the possibility that someone close to her was involved in whatever was happening. Isabella approached Carmen and Sophia with the letter folded in her purse and her expression carefully neutral. "How did you enjoy the evening? I hope it wasn't too overwhelming." Carmen beamed at her. "It was magical, Mija. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished, and I'm so glad we were here to see it." Sophia hugged Isabella again. "This was better than any movie premiere or awards show. Watching people recognize your achievements, seeing how much respect you've earned in your industry, it made me understand why this work matters so much to you." Isabella studied both women's faces, looking for signs of deception, guilt, anything that might suggest they knew more about the evening's events than they were revealing. But all she saw was genuine happiness, authentic pride, the kind of family love she had been craving for years. "I'm so glad you were here," Isabella said, meaning it completely while simultaneously wondering if she could trust her own instincts about the people she loved most. Over the following week, Isabella hired a private investigator to look into the break-in at the Sunset Manor. She also quietly reviewed security footage from all her properties, looking for any signs of unusual activity or unauthorized access. What she discovered was more disturbing than the original incident. Over the past 3 months, there had been a pattern of small security breaches across her hotel empire. Someone had been systematically gathering information about her business operations, her financial records, her expansion plans, and her personal life. The breaches were sophisticated enough that they had gone unnoticed by her regular security staff, but comprehensive enough that whoever was behind them now had access to virtually every aspect of Isabella's business and personal affairs. Most troubling, the pattern of access suggested that the perpetrator had inside knowledge about Isabella's schedules, her habits, her security protocols. This wasn't random corporate espionage, this was someone who knew Isabella personally and professionally, someone who had been planning this campaign for months. Isabella spent sleepless nights trying to identify who might have both the motive and the capability to mount such an extensive operation against her. Disgruntled employees, competitors, former business associates who felt wronged by her success. But the personal nature of the threatening letter, the references to family and abandonment, kept bringing Isabella's thoughts back to the people who felt most betrayed by her achievements, Carmen and Sophia. The idea that her own mother and sister could be involved in sabotaging her business was so painful that Isabella tried to dismiss it as paranoia born of stress and exhaustion. But the evidence kept pointing toward someone with intimate knowledge of her life, someone who felt personally wronged by her success, someone who believed she had forgotten her family and needed to be reminded of her origins. 2 weeks after the break-in, Isabella received a second message, this one delivered to her penthouse apartment building. The security guard called to inform her that someone had left an envelope addressed to her personally, but when they reviewed the security footage, the person who delivered it had somehow avoided being captured clearly on camera. The second letter was more specific and more threatening. "Isabella, you didn't pay attention the first time, so now we have to be more direct. You've built your empire by abandoning the people who loved you first, but you can't run from your obligations forever. Your family sacrificed for your success, and now it's time for you to sacrifice for theirs. Check your business accounts tomorrow morning. Consider it a down payment on everything you owe." Isabella read the letter with hands that shook with anger as much as fear. Whoever was behind this campaign had now crossed the line from intimidation to actual theft, and they were justifying it as some kind of moral correction for Isabella's alleged abandonment of family obligations. Isabella called her accountant immediately and requested a comprehensive review of all business accounts. What they discovered was devastating. Over the past month, small amounts of money had been transferred from various accounts associated with Isabella's hotels. The individual transfers were small enough to avoid triggering automatic security alerts, but collectively they added up to nearly $50,000. More troubling, the transfers had been authorized using Isabella's personal access codes and security protocols. Whoever was stealing from her had not only accessed her physical offices and computer systems, but had also somehow obtained her most confidential financial information. Isabella stared at the account summaries her team had prepared, trying to understand how anyone could have gained such comprehensive access to her business operations. The level of inside knowledge required suggested either professional hackers working for a major competitor, or someone very close to Isabella who had been systematically betraying her trust for months. That night, Isabella made a decision that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. She hired a second private investigator, one who specialized in background checks and personal security, and asked him to quietly investigate everyone in her inner circle: family members, employees, business associates, anyone who had regular access to her offices or her personal life. The investigation that followed was the most difficult period of Isabella's adult life. For 3 weeks, she continued her normal routines while knowing that someone she trusted was systematically destroying everything she had built. Every conversation felt loaded with potential deception, every interaction carried the possibility that she was looking at the person who was betraying her. When the investigators' report arrived, Isabella read it alone in her penthouse at 3 a.m, knowing that whatever she discovered would fundamentally change her understanding of the people she loved most. The report was thorough, devastating, and completely conclusive. Sofia Martinez had been recruited 6 months earlier by a group of investors who were attempting a hostile takeover of Isabella's business empire. These investors had approached Sofia through Diego, who had been contacted by someone claiming to represent a family advocacy group that helped relatives of successful people claim their fair share of inherited wealth. The story Sofia had been told was that Isabella was legally obligated to share her business success with family members, but that she was using legal loopholes and complex business structures to avoid her responsibilities. The investors had convinced Sofia that she was entitled to a significant ownership stake in Isabella's hotels, and that Isabella was deliberately hiding this information to avoid sharing profits with her family. Diego had been paid $25,000 to convince Sofia to participate in gathering information about Isabella's business operations. Sofia, struggling financially during her divorce and feeling resentful about Isabella's inability to involve family in her business success, had agreed to help with what she believed was legitimate legal research. Over the course of 6 months, Sofia had used her renewed relationship with Isabella to gather information about business operations, security protocols, financial accounts, and expansion plans. She had photographed documents during family dinners, recorded conversations during phone calls, and even installed monitoring software on Isabella's computer during a visit to the Sunset Manor. The break-in at Isabella's office had been Sofia's final assignment, a task that required her to access physical files that couldn't be obtained remotely. The investors had provided her with sophisticated equipment and technical support, making it possible for her to bypass security systems that should have been impenetrable. But according to the investigators' report, Sofia was beginning to have doubts about the legitimacy of her actions. Her conversations with Diego, recorded by surveillance equipment the investigators had installed, revealed growing anxiety about what she had been asked to do and increasing suspicion that she was being manipulated rather than assisted. The final piece of the puzzle was the most heartbreaking. Carmen had no knowledge of Sofia's activities, but she had been inadvertently providing information that supported the scheme. The investors had approached Carmen through her church, claiming to be researching successful family businesses for a documentary about immigrant achievement in Los Angeles. Carmen, proud of Isabella's success and eager to share her daughter's story, had provided detailed information about Isabella's childhood, her early struggles, her family relationships, and her business development. This information had been used to create the psychological profile that made it possible to manipulate Sofia's resentments and insecurities. Isabella finished reading the report as sunrise began to lighten the sky outside her penthouse windows. She sat with the documents spread across her dining room table, looking out at the city where she had built her empire, and tried to process the reality that her own sister had spent months systematically betraying everything Isabella had worked to achieve. The pain was unlike anything Isabella had ever experienced. Not just the professional betrayal, not just the financial theft, but the personal devastation of learning that Sophia's renewed interest in their relationship had been motivated by a scheme to destroy Isabella's business. Every family dinner, every phone call, every moment of connection Isabella had treasured over the past year had been contaminated by Sophia's deception. Every time Isabella had shared details about her work, every time she had opened her offices to family visits, every time she had trusted Sophia with information about her life, she had been unknowingly providing ammunition for people who wanted to tear down everything she had built. But underneath the pain and betrayal, Isabella felt something else, a cold, calculating anger that was focused not just on Sophia, but on the investors who had manipulated her family's insecurities and financial desperation to turn them into weapons against Isabella's success. Isabella spent the rest of that morning making phone calls that would change everything. She contacted her lawyers, her accountant, her head of security, and the FBI agents who specialized in corporate fraud and identity theft. By noon, Isabella had assembled a team of professionals whose job was not just to stop the theft and manipulation, but to ensure that everyone involved in the scheme faced complete legal and financial consequences for their actions. Isabella wasn't just going to protect her business empire, she was going to systematically destroy the people who had tried to destroy her. And she was going to make sure that Sophia understood exactly what she had been manipulated into betraying before the legal consequences began. But first, Isabella was going to do something that would demonstrate the true scope of her power and the complete futility of her enemies' efforts to tear her down. Isabella was going to give Sophia and Carmen a front-row seat to watch their assumptions about Isabella's priorities prove devastatingly, humiliatingly wrong. The trap Isabella set for Sophia was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of confronting her sister directly about the theft and espionage, Isabella decided to let Sophia reveal the full extent of her betrayal while demonstrating just how completely Sophia had misunderstood both Isabella's character and the scope of her power. Isabella called Sophia on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice carefully neutral but tinged with apparent concern. "Sophia, I need to talk to you about something, and I hope you'll hear me out before you respond. I've been thinking about our conversation at dinner a few months ago, about you wanting to be more involved in my business success, and I think I was wrong to be so protective about keeping family separate from work." Isabella could hear Sophia's sharp intake of breath, could practically feel her sister's excitement through the phone. "What do you mean?" Sophia asked, her voice carefully controlled but unable to completely hide her anticipation. "I mean, I've been selfish. I've been so focused on maintaining professional standards that I lost sight of what really matters, sharing my success with the people I love most. I want to change that, starting now." Isabella continued before Sophia could respond. "I'm planning to restructure my business to include family ownership stakes. Nothing dramatic that would affect day-to-day operations, but significant enough that you and Mom would be true partners in what I've built, not just beneficiaries of my generosity." Sophia was silent for so long that Isabella wondered if she was trying to figure out how this development would affect her arrangement with the investors who had been paying her for information. "Isabella, that's amazing. That's more than I ever expected or hoped for. But are you sure? I don't want you to make changes to your business structure just to make me feel included." Isabella smiled grimly at Sophia's attempt to sound concerned about Isabella's interests while obviously calculating how much money might be involved. "I'm completely sure. In fact, I want to make this change as quickly as possible. I'm tired of feeling disconnected from family, tired of success that doesn't include the people who matter most to me." Isabella paused as if making a spontaneous decision. "Sophia, would you be able to come to my office tomorrow morning? I want to show you some documents, walk you through what I'm planning, get your input on how we structure this so it feels right for everyone." "Of course. Yes. Absolutely. What time?" 10 o'clock. "And Sophia, don't mention this to Mom yet. I want to have all the details worked out before we tell her, so she doesn't worry about the business implications." After hanging up, Isabella spent the rest of the day finalizing arrangements for what would be Sophia's final visit to any of Isabella's properties. By tomorrow evening, Sophia would be in federal custody, the investors who had manipulated her would be facing fraud charges, and Isabella's family would understand exactly what kind of person they had been dealing with for the past 15 years. But before the legal consequences began, Isabella was going to give Sophia one last chance to see what she had been trying to destroy. Sophia arrived at the Sunset Manor the next morning dressed more professionally than Isabella had seen her in years. She was carrying a leather portfolio that Isabella recognized from the investigators' photos as containing recording equipment provided by the hostile investors. Isabella greeted her sister with a warmth that was only partly performance. Despite everything Sophia had done, Isabella still loved her and was genuinely sad about what was going to happen next. "Sophia, thank you for coming. I know this is going to sound strange, but I want to start by showing you something I've never shared with anyone in our family." Isabella led Sophia through the hotel's main lobby to a private elevator that required a key card to access. They rode to the top floor in silence, Sophia obviously nervous but trying to hide her anticipation behind professional composure. When the elevator doors opened, Sophia gasped audibly. The penthouse level of the Sunset Manor wasn't guest rooms or event spaces, it was Isabella's private office and living space, a sanctuary she had created for herself that rivaled any luxury residence in the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Los Angeles from the mountains to the ocean. Original artwork covered walls that weren't dominated by built-in bookcases filled with business journals and literary classics. The furniture was contemporary but comfortable, expensive but chosen for personal taste rather than public impression. "Isabella, this is incredible. I had no idea you had a space like this." Isabella watched Sophia take in the surroundings, obviously calculating the value of everything she was seeing, obviously recording details that she would report back to her handlers. "I've never brought family here before because I was afraid you wouldn't understand why I needed a space that was separate from both business operations and family expectations. But that was wrong of me. This is part of who I am, and I should have shared it with you." Isabella led Sophia to a sitting area near the windows and gestured for her to take a seat. "Before we talk about business restructuring, I want to show you some things that will help you understand the scope of what we're discussing." Isabella opened a laptop and pulled up financial documents that showed the current valuation of her hotel empire, $87 million across 5 properties, with projected growth that would push the total value past $100 million within 2 years. Sophia stared at the numbers with an expression that mixed amazement with something that looked almost like hunger. Isabella watched her sister's face carefully, seeing the exact moment when Sophia realized the true scale of what she had been helping others to steal. "Isabella, I had no idea the business was worth this much. When you said you were successful, I thought you meant comfortable, maybe a few $1,000,000. But this is generational wealth." Isabella nodded slowly. "It is. And Sophia, there's something else you need to understand before we discuss restructuring." Isabella pulled up another document, this one showing charitable contributions Isabella had made over the past 5 years, over $12 million donated to causes supporting immigrant families, single mothers, and educational opportunities for underprivileged children. "This is where most of my profits go, Sophia. Not to expensive cars or luxury vacations or showing off wealth. I've been using my success to help families like ours, families who need opportunities and support to break cycles of poverty." Sophia's face went pale as she absorbed the implications. "You've been giving away millions of dollars while I thought you were just hoarding wealth and forgetting about family." Isabella opened one more file, and Sophia's expression shifted from shock to horror. On the screen was a detailed report of every security breach, every stolen file, every transferred dollar over the past 6 months, along with recorded conversations between Sophia and Diego discussing their arrangement with the investors. "Isabella, I can explain, Sophia." Isabella's voice was quiet but carried absolute authority. "Before you say anything else, you need to understand what's about to happen. In approximately 15 minutes, FBI agents are going to arrive here to arrest you for corporate espionage, identity theft, and fraud. The investors who convinced you to help them are already in custody as of this morning." Sophia started crying immediately, Not the gentle tears of sadness but the harsh sobs of someone whose world was collapsing in real time. Isabella, please, I thought they were legitimate. They told me you were legally required to share ownership with family, that you were using loopholes to avoid your obligations. I thought I was helping our family get what we deserved. Isabella felt her heart break despite her anger. Sophia, did you really believe that I would spend 15 years building a business empire while deliberately cheating my own family? Did you really think so little of my character that corporate theft seemed like a reasonable way to address your concerns? I don't know what I thought. I was desperate. The divorce, the money problems, feeling like I was failing at everything while you succeeded at everything. When Diego said there might be a way to claim part of what you'd built, I wanted to believe it was true. Isabella stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the city where she had achieved everything she had dreamed of, only to have it nearly destroyed by the people she loved most. Sophia, the tragedy isn't that you made mistakes or that you were manipulated by people who knew how to exploit your insecurities. The tragedy is that if you had simply asked me for help, honest help, not schemes or theft, I would have given you anything you needed. Isabella turned back to face her sister. Do you want to know what I was actually planning to show you today? Before I discovered your betrayal? Sophia nodded through her tears. Isabella pulled up one final document, a business plan for expanding her hotel empire to include a luxury spa and wellness center, with Sophia listed as the proposed director of operations, complete with salary projections and profit-sharing arrangements that would have made Sophia financially secure for life. I was going to offer you a real role in my business, Sophia. Not charity, not pity, but a genuine partnership based on your skills and interests. I had been planning this for months, ever since your divorce was finalized and you started talking about wanting a career that felt meaningful. Sophia stared at the document, seeing her name and photograph included in professional projections, seeing evidence that Isabella had been thinking about including family in her success in exactly the ways Sophia had claimed to want. Why didn't you tell me you were considering this? Because I wanted to have a complete proposal, something concrete I could offer rather than vague possibilities. Because I knew how important it would be for you to feel genuinely qualified rather than just helped by family connections. Because I wanted to surprise you with something wonderful rather than disappointing you with something that might not work out. The sound of elevator doors opening interrupted their conversation. Isabella's head of security appeared with 3 FBI agents, their expressions professional but not unkind. Ms. Martinez, we're ready to proceed. Isabella looked at Sophia one last time, seeing her sister not as a betrayer but as someone whose love had been twisted by desperation and manipulation into something destructive. Sophia, I want you to understand something before they take you away. I don't hate you for what you've done. I'm heartbroken by it, but I don't hate you. And when you've served whatever sentence they give you, when you've had time to rebuild your life and figure out who you want to be, I'll still be your sister. Sophia was sobbing too hard to respond coherently, but she reached out and squeezed Isabella's hand with desperate gratitude. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry for everything. I know you are. And someday, when you're ready, we'll figure out how to be family again. 3 years later, Isabella stood in the lobby of her newest hotel, the Millennium Grand's sister property in San Francisco, watching her staff prepare for another successful grand opening. Her empire had not only survived Sophia's betrayal but had grown stronger, expanding to 7 cities with plans for international properties in development. The legal proceedings had concluded with Sophia serving 18 months in federal prison followed by community service and restitution payments. The investors who had manipulated her received much harsher sentences, their scheme exposed as part of a larger pattern of targeting successful women through family members. Carmen had been devastated by the revelations about Sophia's actions, but had chosen to support both daughters through the crisis. She had moved in with Isabella temporarily, helping to manage the emotional aftermath while learning about Isabella's business in ways that felt natural rather than forced. Isabella's phone buzzed with a text message from Sophia, who had been released 6 months earlier and was now working as a patient coordinator at a non-profit clinic that served low-income families. Isabella, I know you're busy with the San Francisco opening, but I wanted to tell you something. I got promoted to program director today. It's not much money, But it's meaningful work helping families like ours used to be. I think you'd be proud of what I'm doing now. Isabella smiled as she typed her response. I am proud of you, Sophia. I've been proud of you every day since you decided to rebuild your life with honesty instead of shortcuts. Congratulations on the promotion. The reply came quickly. Would you like to have dinner this week? Just the three of us, no agenda, no business discussions. I want to hear about San Francisco, and I want to tell you about the families I'm helping. I think we might finally be ready to just be sisters again. Isabella looked around her beautiful hotel lobby, filled with guests and staff and the tangible evidence of everything she had built through vision and determination and refusal to accept limitations others tried to place on her dreams. But the message that made her happiest wasn't about occupancy rates or revenue projections or expansion opportunities. It was about the possibility of sharing Sunday afternoons with her family again, of having relationships based on love rather than fear or resentment or misunderstanding. Isabella typed back, yes. I would love that more than anything. Because Isabella had learned that the most successful empires aren't measured just in dollars or properties or professional recognition. They're measured in the relationships that survive betrayal and grow stronger, in the love that endures through mistakes and emerges more authentic, in the families that learn to celebrate each other's achievements without losing themselves in the process. Isabella Martinez had built a $50 million hotel empire, but her greatest achievement was discovering that success and family love didn't have to be mutually exclusive after all. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you, it's becoming so secure in your own worth that you can forgive them, help them rebuild, and create something better together than any of you could achieve alone. And sometimes the sweetest victory is simply letting the people who doubted you discover that your success was never about proving them wrong, it was about proving yourself right.